Masechet Nedarim Daf Lamed. We begin with the Mishnah. We're going to see 4 different Mishnayot today. A common theme is that when one makes a neder, he has in mind a colloquial language, not the exact literal definition, but rather the way most people use a certain term. Also, another theme is that sometimes there are inclusive categories, and the larger category will include the smaller one, but not the other way around. So the Mishnah says, "Hanoder miyoredeh hayam mutar biyosheveh hayabasha." Someone who makes a vow not to have any benefit from seafarers, maybe had a bad experience on a cruise or something, says sailors, that's it, I don't want to have anything to do with them. He's still permitted to derive benefit from those who live on dry land. That makes sense. Miyosheveh hayabasha asur miyoredeh hayam sheyoredeh hayam bichlal yosheveh basha. If he makes a vow, I don't want to have any benefit from those who live on dry land, well then he's prohibited not only from people who live on the land, but he's also prohibited from benefiting from seafarers, because even seafarers are included within people that live on dry land, right? Even people that are sailors, even if they go out for months at a time, eventually they come back home and they live on land for a significant amount of time. So therefore, this guy, I don't know why he's making this kind of vow. Maybe he wants to be, separated from everybody. He wants to be a monk and live alone. So he takes a vow against all those who live on dry land, but that means everyone. Lo ke'elu shehelchim me'ako liyafo ela b'mi shedarko lefaresh. Now, when we say seafarers, this does not include people who simply commute from Akko to Yafo, but rather someone who actually goes and departs for long trips. Here's Akko, here's Yafo. If you wanted to get from one to the other, I mean, you could go over land, but it's easier to just go on a boat. And the boat basically hugs the coast, and so it's really not going deep into the sea. It's just going right along the coast. So that's not called seafaring. That person would be included in the people that live on dry land. The Gemara is going to ask this last clarification: is it clarifying the use of Yoredeh Hayam in the first clause of the Mishnah or in the second clause? If it's in the first clause, it would be a leniency. If in the second clause, it would actually be a stringency. Here we go. Rav Papa v'Rav Acha b'red Rav Ika. Chad matne aresha v'chad matne asefa. Rav Papa and Rav Acha disagreed. One said that the last definition applies to the resha. One said it applies to the second clause here. Aman detane aresha matne hachi. Hanoder miyoredeh hayam mutar biyosheveh yabasha. Ha biyoredeh hayam asur. So it read as follows: someone who makes a vow that he won't have any benefit from those who are seafarers is permitted to interact with those who live on the land. But those who are seafarers will be prohibited to him. Now, what's the definition of seafarers? Velo ke'elu haholechim me'ako leyafo. This will not include those who just simply travel in a short distance from Akko to Yafo right along the coast. That's not called seafarers. Those people are still called people who dwell on dry land. Just because they go on a short ferry ride doesn't make them sailors. Rather, it only applies to those who depart out to sea on longer trips. That's the first opinion. But the other opinion says that clarification, that definition applies to the second case that says someone who makes a vow that he won't receive any benefit from those who live on dry land. He is prohibited from everyone, including those who are seafarers. When we say that, don't think that only means those who go on short trips on the ferry ride from Akko to Yafo, because they're called dry land people, and they're included in that category. And you might think that maybe sailors that go for months at a time, maybe they would not be included in this vow. No, not so. Even someone who goes out on long sea trips, eventually he comes back to dry land. And therefore, if someone says, I will not get any benefit from those who live on dry land, it includes not only those who go on short trips, but it also includes those who sail on long trips. Good. Next Mishnah. Hanoder mero'eh hachama, asur af besumin. Someone says, I will not have any benefit from those who see the sun. Well, then he was prohibited not only from people who can see and see the sun, but even from people who are blind, who can't see the sun. Why? What the person means by saying those who see the sun is those who the sun can see. He means those exposed to the sun. Okay, the Gemara will explain why he means that. If he really wanted to make himself prohibited to those who are sighted, as opposed to those who are blind, then he would have said, I am prohibited from those who can see. So the fact that he said, I am prohibited from those who can see the sun, that's a different story. It's not about seeing versus blind. It's about those that are exposed to the sun, though anything that lives up on the land. What will that exclude? Lapuke, dagim, ve'ubarim. That will exclude fish and fetuses. Fish under the water. If you go, even just a few feet under the water, it's very dark. And fetuses that are not exposed to the sun. So that's what that phrase means. Ruach Hama doesn't mean literally those who see the sun. It's an idiom. That means anyone who is exposed to the sun. Next Mishnah. Hanoder mishechore harosh asur bekerchin uba'ale sevot ומותר בנשים ובקטנים שהן נקראים שחורי הראש אלא אנשים. Someone makes a vow that I'm not going to have any benefit from those who have dark heads. Now, if we said this word today, we would assume it means people who have dark hair, black hair, dark brown hair. But in ancient times, this was an idiom, even in other languages, in Babylonian literature, this is an idiom to mean adult men, right? People with dark heads means adult men. And so, because it's a general idiom, that person would be prohibited even from bald people, even though bald people don't have dark hair, they don't have dark heads, and also people who are elderly and have white hair or gray hair, so even though they're not dark, it includes those people, because that's what the phrase means. And that, if that person who makes that vow is permitted to derive benefit from women and children, because that's the idiom, does not refer to women, even though women can have dark hair and children can also have dark hair, but that's not what it means. Shechorei rosh, that's just a colloquial, strange word that means adult men. All right. My ta'ama midelo ka'amad mi ba'ale se'ar. And so how do we know he means that? If a person really wanted to make himself prohibited from those with hair or dark hair, he would have said mi ba'ale se'ar, someone who has hair. And then that would exclude someone who is bald. But he didn't say that. He used this more unusual phrase, which is just a colloquialism. And he's permitted to women and children to derive benefit from them, because the Mishnah already explained that this phrase shechorei harosh only applies to adult men. My tama, and what's the reason for that? Anashim zimnin demichsur shayu zimnin demigalur shayu. It's because adult men, sometimes they cover their hair, sometimes they don't cover their hair, and therefore generally you can see their hair, and usually most people have hair and it's dark, and so they're called the dark-headed ones. You see, incidentally, that in the reality, men did not always cover their hair with a hat or a turban or anything. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. The custom of wearing kippah was not yet in force. Okay, aval nashim le'olam michsu uktanim le'olam miglu. But women, they always cover their hair. Okay, this is another realia check, that women generally did always cover their hair, and so therefore they would not be called dark-headed ones, because one rarely saw their heads and their hair. And children always uncover their hair. That's interesting. They didn't, I guess more when you're an adult, then you wear a hat, more distinguished, a turban. But kids were uncovered, and so they would not be called dark-headed ones. Maybe he's talking about little kids that don't have a lot of hair yet. Since that's just the phrase, it means when one says dark-headed ones, it's not literal, but rather an idiom that means adult males. Okay, next Mishnah. Hanoder min hayeludim mutar banoladim. Min hanoladim asur min hayiludim. Someone makes a vow that I'm not going to derive any benefit from those that are born. That sounds like those who have been born. So that person is permitted to derive benefit from those who will be born. Noladim sounds like it's talking about the future. We're going to see Gemara is going to say not necessarily. Actually, it's an ambiguous term. Just means those who are born, but the way it's most of the time used is Yiludim is those who were already born, so then he's prohibited from those. But Noladim is the future, so anyone born after he says that vow, he can benefit from. But the opposite, if he says min hanoladim, I'm not going to benefit from all those who will be born, then he is prohibited. Asur min hayiludim, he's also prohibited from those who were already born. So you see already here that this phrase the word noladim is ambiguous. That's the opinion of Chachamim. However, Rabbi Meir matir af bayiludim. Rabbi Meir permits also yiludim. The Gemara is going to deal with what this word also is doing here, but we're going to conclude that if a person says hanoladim, I'm prohibited from those who will be born, then according to Chachamim, he's prohibited from everyone, and according to Rabbi Meir, he is permitted from those who were born. He means only the future and not the past. But why does it say af then? We'll discuss. Hachamim omerim, lo nitkaven ze ela b'mi shedarko lehivaled. Hachamim say no. When you say noladim, then what people mean is anyone whose nature is to be born. He doesn't mean specifically about the future, those who will be born. He means human beings or anything that is born, as opposed to, we'll see in the Gemara, something that comes from an egg. Okay. Rabbi Meir, ve'la mibaya noladim ela miman asur. Now, according to Rabbi Meir, if we take literally this word af, it sounds like Rabbi Meir is saying, also the yiludim are permitted, and the noladim also. So that means if he says min hanoladim, he's permitted to everyone, noladim, and also yiludim. Well, then in that case, who is he asur from? What, this vow has no effect? When he says, I'm going to not derive benefit from noladim, that doesn't make sense. You should prohibit someone. That has some meaning. So we explain. No, this is what he meant to say. In this case, I don't think you actually have to add words. You could explain it as such. Hanoder min hayeludim mutar banoladim. That's the first clause. That's the same as what we have. Someone who makes a vow about those who were born is permitted to those who will be born. So yiludim is more specific. Min hanoladim, if you say those who will be born, asur bayiludim, then according to Chachamim, one is prohibited from the noladim and also from the yiludim, because according to Chachamim, noladim is a more expansive phrase. However, Rabbi Meir omer, af hanoder min hanoladim mutar bayiludim, ki yechi denoder bayiludim mutar banoladim. Rabbi Meir says the word af is not going on who is permitted, that everyone is permitted, but rather it's saying that this phrase is parallel to the first phrase. They're just the inverse of each other. So he says also, one who says noladim means only the future. People that will be born are prohibited, but those who were already born, those are mutar. Just like the first clause, where someone who says a neder from yiludim, those who were born, is permitted to those who will be born. So that's what the word af means. It just comes to give an equivalence between the first clause and the second clause, that both of them refer to one time period, but not the other. All right, so now we understand what Rabbi Meir meant there. Amar le Rav Papa Abaye, lememra de noladim de mityaledan mashma. So now Rav Papa asks Abaye, according to what you just said here, are you trying to tell me that the word noladim means those who will be born in the future, right? That's the basic meaning, because certainly Rabbi Meir said that, and even Chachamim have to explain themselves that when one says noladim, he means all those whose nature is to be born, even though literally it means noladim in the future, right? You see how the Mishnah uses it in the first clause, mutar ba noladim. Noladim means those born in the future. So the dictionary definition of noladim is about the future. Is that true, Rapapayas Abaye? Look at this pasuk. Ela me'ata shene banecha hanoladim lecha be'eretz Mitzrayim. So Yaakov tells Yosef about your two sons that noladim, that were born in the land of Egypt. Hachinami dit yaledanhu. But does that also mean in the future that they will be born? That's not true. This is referring to Yosef's children, Menashe and Ephraim, who were already born a long time before he said this. And so here, noladim clearly refers to the past, not the future. So what can you do with that? So noladim means past, not future. Velamai. So now the Gemara says, wait. So what do you want to say? Did yilidu mashma, that the word noladim means the past? That doesn't work either. Here's another proof. Elama'ata dichtiv. Hine ben nolad leben David Yoshiyahu shemo. In the time of David, there's a prediction that there will be born someone to the house of David named Yoshiyahu. King way in the future, right? Some 300 years later. Hachinami dehava. So over there, it says the word nolad, same as noladim. And are you telling me he was already born at the time of David? Yoshiyahu was born? That's simply not true. Vaidan Menashe loba. Even Menashe was not yet born, and that's the grandfather of Yoshia. So certainly Yoshia, who was not born. Ela mashmahachi umashmahachi. Rather, the word nolad and noladim can mean future, it can mean past. Both are proper dictionary definitions. But when you're saying a neder, you use colloquial language. Nedarim halech achal leshon ben adam. And so the general usage of noladim means the future. And that's why, according to the Bimeir, it applies only to the future. Whereas, according to Chachamim, when you say noladim, just plain like that, he probably means anyone who is born both future and past. Anyone whose nature it is to be born. So we'll explain Chachamim. Chachamim omrim, lo nitkaven ze, ela mimi shedarko lehivaled, lapuke mai, lapuke dagim be'ofot. Right? Noladim, according to Chachamim, means those whose nature is to be born, and this is going to exclude fish and birds who are not born, not a live birth, but rather are born from eggs. So that person who makes such a vow cannot have benefit from anything, any mammals, anything that's born from a live mother, but he can still eat eggs or derive benefit from birds. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen v'amen.